The November 17th, 2021 special meeting of the Fairfield Board of Education is called to order. Present we have Ms. Rotelli, Ms. Jacobson, Ms. Guernsey, Mrs. Gerber, myself, Mrs. Vitale, Superintendent Cummings, Mr. Asa, Mrs. Maxinelli, Mr. Peterson, and our newest board member, Ms. Kelly. Before I ask you to all please rise for the pledge, I would just like to welcome Ms. Kelly to the table. She joined just as we're about to head into budget season and has hit the ground running. So welcome. She's replacing Ms. Pitko, who, due to personal reasons, professional reasons, chose to resign from the board. We thank Ms. Pitko for her service, and I'm looking forward to working with Ms. Kelly. And with that, please rise for the pledge. And Ms. Kelly, will you lead us in the pledge? Thank you, and I apologize that we started a little bit, well, a lot late, but we'll get right to business. Superintendent Cummings, the floor is yours.
All right, good evening, everyone. I'm just going to move to the, as Mr. Asa calls it, the hot seat. We're going to do a PowerPoint, and what I'll do is I'll go through the PowerPoint, and then we can answer questions, the board questions as we go through. Okay.
Mrs. Vitale, I was hoping you could explain how this was a different step from in previous years, what we're doing at this meeting.
Absolutely can. Just this is a discussion of the 2022-2023 Fairfield Public Schools budget initiatives. We're starting the budget process earlier. We have a large budget. There's a lot of initiatives included in it, and as a way of having input earlier before the budget is finalized. Well, I don't want to get ahead of it. Mr. Cummings is going to present that in his presentation. We wanted to, staff wanted to bring some of the big picture initiatives to the board for input prior to finalizing the budget in the next 7 weeks or so. This was first discussed at the Finance Committee level and brought forward to the board. This will be an opportunity for staff to present and for the board to give some initial feedback. Hopefully by having these discussions now, it'll make the budget that's presented to us in January, that process go a little bit smoother, a little more efficient. As board members know, there's a lot to digest with the budget, a lot of questions and answers, hoping that maybe if we start the process earlier, some of those questions and answers can be addressed now, just to free up time later in January. Anything I missed there? He's going to cover it.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Mike Cummings, Superintendent of Schools. As Ms. Vitale was explaining, this is a new step in the budget development process, driven by the desire to essentially elongate some of the conversation around the most meaningful aspects of our budget. We have found that January is often very rushed to present new information for the board's consideration. New ideas are being presented essentially as new ideas in a very limited time frame with a lot of additional information. So the desire of tonight's presentation is to essentially take a step in earlier, open a window earlier into the budget development process. We still have a long way to go in a very short time to complete the budget, but we wanted to bring forward and share with you and with the public in the town essentially some of the ideas that have emerged from teacher and administrator conversations over the first couple months of school, and to add to that, some sense of the prioritization that our administrators have brought to the table around these ideas. So I'll explain that process in a second. Hold on one second. So essentially, the goals for tonight is, again, just to familiarize the board and the public with the 2022-23 budget, to solicit the Board of Ed questions and ideas to help further shape and refine these proposals, and to align those priorities identified here tonight to the, at this point, draft goals of the proposed next district improvement plan, which are the foundation for the superintendent's budget goals, as we discussed, and they'll be presented again tonight in the, as part of this, as part of the meeting. Got to work two-handed here. I want to be really clear that we're not going to be getting into dollar figures tonight. That right now we're talking about a conceptual understanding of what has been identified as priorities across levels within the school system. We are going to be further refining these ideas based on conversations tonight, further conversations among the executive directors and the district administrators over the next 5-6 weeks as we head into the holiday break and try to have budget all completed at that point. It is possible, certainly possible, that not all the ideas presented tonight are going to emerge in the final proposed budget in January. In fact, we hope that it may be none of them. But because we still don't yet have a full idea of what the entire budget encapsulates for us, and we're going to be always mindful of the total ask when we bring that forward. So, but our hope is that, again, this conversation tonight will lead to further conversations about further developing the budget and making those final decisions. Again, the last bullet, I apologize. These are on the 4 draft budget goals, and tonight we're not going to be getting into facility and maintenance issues and concerns. So just some background, and I want to thank Ms. Laborious for putting these slides together. She had presented this as part of a short presentation to the Finance Committee. I've added a couple slides here, but I really want to thank her for not only the slides, but also the layout, which I appropriated for tonight. So we always want to set our budget in context to the work of the district, the overall work of the district. And it's really important, as we state all the time, that our budget should reflect the values and ethics of the school system. The values and ethics of the Fairfield Public Schools are captured in our mission, our learning principles, and in this belief in the instructional core. You've seen this slide before. I want to just point out, I won't go through the details of this slide, but it's critically important to remember that when we work on any aspect, any vertex of the triangle, that we have corresponding work on the other 2 vertices. So if we're going to be working, for example, in the issue of content or curriculum, that we provide the appropriate professional learning for teachers to deliver that content, and that we provide the appropriate instructional supports and alignment, vertical and horizontal, for students to access that curriculum. So that's the basic core concept of the instructional core, but it's essential to the work that we do as a district. In the center is really the work that happens in the classroom, the instructional cycle of planning, teaching, assessing, and then reflecting and adjusting. That is the work. And everything we do as a school system should lead to support that heart of that triangle. That should be the fundamental judgment of our work. The executive director team has held meetings with representatives from each of these departments in the central office, as well as all of our instructional level teams, elementary, preschool, elementary, middle, and high school. When they did that presentation, we initially solicited from them their proposals and ideas. These, again, are more of the high-level ideas. And then we asked each of those teams or those levels to prioritize and rank their final set of proposals. So as we went in through this work, essentially what we came into it, let me see if let me just actually, I'll skip over this slide because it's a, what we emerged into it was that when we met with the district leadership team on November 4th, each group came forward with a prioritized list of its proposals. So special ed had a prioritized list of their proposals, elementary principals, the instructional program directors, high school, middle school. Each of them had a list of their proposals rank ordered by need. We then broke into level groups, or cross-level groups, excuse me, on the morning of the 4th. So cross-level group, essentially what we would try to do is we would try to balance the working groups, at least one representative of elementary, one from middle, one from high, one program director, one representative of special education. And they had to then take the proposals that were listed on this chart, where all the proposals were ranked, and then develop out of that a final ranking. So the challenge was the challenge was not in collaborating, because they do that quite well. The challenge was in making some decisions for sharing what the reasons were behind their priorities, and then essentially what every member of the group had to do was to surrender their own needs to the conversation among the group, right? That they had to open themselves up to an understanding of why another level might need something, and why that something might be more important than what they had brought to the table as a #1 priority. So that work took place on the morning, for most of the morning on the 4th. And again, they ranked by the goals, but I want to be really clear, they ranked across the goals. So they didn't have to have a #1 for goal 1, and #1 for goal 2, or #1 for goal 3. They had to have a #1 across all 3 goals and a #2 for across all 3 goals, right, and so on. And we asked them to identify at least the top 5. Out of that conversation then emerged the information that we're going to share with you tonight. I took the liberty of seeing the results. I took the liberty of essentially trying to find some thematic pieces among the goals. So while a middle level might have a specific request around interventionists, for example, we saw similar requests at the elementary and high school level as well. And so I would combine those things across levels, because it really is a need that pervades the school system. This is just a cheat sheet for how the goals align, and I want to be really clear that as we looked at this, some of these goals, as you can see from the way the chart is organized, some of the goals that were identified, the concepts and ideas that were identified persist across multiple goals. So if you look at something like the social work community outreach position, right? That was something that emerged from a couple of our schools at different levels, but essentially was this idea that if we, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in a second, but if we identify somebody, position for somebody who can reach out and be a parent liaison to our school communities, that will help both the support of our students, socially, emotionally. It'll address some of the diversity and equity and inclusion issues we need to face. And so that's why it persists across the two goals. Quite honestly, I could have extended that goal across the academic, because if we are meeting the social and emotional learning needs and the equity and inclusion needs of students, then we should see a corresponding increase in their academic achievement across the school system. I'll drop down and give one more example. The additional EL staff at middle and elementary, again, persists across all 3 goals, because it addresses, in some ways related to the community outreach person, but somebody specifically, because we're seeing an increase in the needs of EL students, and those needs aren't just academic. So the first goal, again, as I explained to the board last time we were together, this is the goal as it's originally been written right now. We are looking to revise this goal, and we're in the process of doing that right now with a work group on the academic goal. But this is the way it was originally written, and this was the way it was presented to the DLT on the 4th. So these are the issues that, or the ideas that came forth around this, centered around this core academics goal. I've broken this into two areas, rather arbitrarily, but I did nonetheless. One of them is around the core academics and how we're going to address what we might refer to as Tier 1 instruction, the instruction that happens in the classrooms. The other way you'll see it is more of an intervention from an SARBI language. Again, you'd be talking Tier 2 and Tier 3, and that's the next slide. So I broke this one out. This is the only goal that I broke out in some ways that way. So the first thing that has emerged as, again, this is across all the levels and departments in the school system. One of the top issues that emerged was implementing a block schedule at the middle school. We have planned a board presentation for this to further get into the specifics of this proposal on December 14th, a couple of meetings from now. One of the questions that's still in play for around this is the potential impact for that on FTE. We've not yet played that all out. And I'll answer specific questions about any of these, but again, I'm going to keep my responses at this point to the higher level responses without getting into specifics. The second issue was the Teachers College Literacy Professional Development for all of our elementary schools. As the board is aware, for the last couple of years, this has been supported in the general ed budget for the work that's happening at Burr Elementary School. There is a desire among the elementary principals that this work be extended across the other 10 schools. We have a math curriculum presentation due to you also on the 14th of December. Related to that, of course, is textbook purchases. The math curriculum review is K-12, but to give you a little foreshadowing of our budget, right now we're expecting that we're only going to be buying textbooks for grades 6 through 12. So again, further details on that coming on the 14th of December. And then one of the requests coming out specifically at the high school is a need to look at additional staffing in different areas to address high school class sizes and course offerings as we go forward. Why don't I see if there's any questions on this slide before I go to the next one? Ms. Guernsey?
Two things. Regarding, the block schedule at the middle school, could you just speak to the parents that are watching that have middle school students when they might be invited to be a part of that process?
Yeah, the presentation to the board will take place on the 14th, and after that, we'll be bringing it forward for further conversation among the community.
Thank you. And one other question, or does anyone else have? Regarding the last line about FTE, could you explain that a little further? I'm not sure. Maybe give us an example of what you mean.
Yeah, I would say that there are the high school principals have identified that after the schedule was all set and done this year, and if you recall that the high school principals made adjustments, they actually reduced FTE at each of the high schools in this current budget. But there's a couple courses that have become tighter as a result of that, and they're looking for some leniency, I suppose, some headroom in that. I would also say that one of the things that we have to consider, and we're still in the process of considering this, is there is now the current junior class is the first class to graduate under the new graduation requirements, and they require the 2 full credits of health, right? Or the 1 full credit of health, and there's a potential need for additional FTE in the health area next year alone. So those are things we're still in the process of identifying, but it could be for some of those course requirements as well.
I didn't know if anybody else, if Mrs. Guernsey was done. So when you say the course offerings, you're thinking that's primarily in the health and safety area?
It could be also, and I think some of the elective areas were concerns.
But we will be hearing as part of that also courses that might be, because one of the things that's always kept us from doing or really pushing ahead with, can we have a course audit, was always the notion that it happened naturally. Students will stop signing up for something, and thus it gets eliminated in that way. So will we be hearing about those trade-offs?
I think that in terms of, are you asking during the budget process?
Yeah.
I think during the budget process, that would be too early. I think that one of the things, because again, we won't have had course selection.
So I wasn't sure if this was going to be reflective as of there have now been a number of years, and thus we know that we won't. I guess I'm looking to hear the argument for the addition, beyond the health, which I understand. And are we also continuing to look at how our current courses could be, I can't remember the phrase we were starting to use, but fulfill multiple buckets? And that, you know, we'd even looked, for example, at some of our culinary arts courses fulfilling safety requirements, or that was an early discussion. I don't remember where that went.
Yeah, that was a conversation, and at this point, that conversation was stalled. But yes, that was one of the things we were looking at, and we were also offering with that the idea to those areas, right, that they could start to develop courses specifically for the fulfillment of those requirements.
Okay, and then whether it is now or in the future, obviously looking to hear much more about the Teachers College literacy professional development, because I know that my perception is that we were really making a dramatic change going back to K2 in terms of our approach to literacy instruction, and away from the Lucy Culkins and away from aspects of the reader workshop. And so to the degree that that is reflected in what this PD is, again, whether it is now or in the future, that's a topic I'm looking to hear more about.
That's a topic that deserves its own headline, because it is. It's a subject that because of its importance deserves more time spent specifically on it. So agreed. Yes.
I just have a piggyback. Yeah. Is this working? Yeah. Just to piggyback off that, I know that you're putting this in here for the Teacher College Literacy Professional Development, but do we foresee that state statute in terms of where we're supposed to have to pick one of the programs that they tell us we have to pick, influencing this need or lack thereof, or the alignment of that?
Yes, that's a very good question, and I appreciate you bringing that up. I think that's one of the kind of flashing yellow lights on this particular issue. We're not sure. We know that statute exists. The details to that statute have not yet emerged, so having that further information is going to ultimately have some impact on what this looks like.
Okay, so this may be something that we want in addition to anyway, is what I'm hearing possibly, regardless of what they may make us do.
That is potential. Yeah, yes, that's a potential. Yep. Ms. Vitale, I'm not trying to usurp your role. Okay. Okay. Let me rephrase that. I don't want to usurp your role. Okay, as previously mentioned, staff at all levels identify needs around additional EL intervention staff. I will tell you that as we look at our numbers, we actually have had a reduction in the number of students who qualify for EL services across the district the last couple of years. But there's been a corresponding, at least there's a concern that the needs of those students has actually increased. And so the desire is to add more time to support those students, particularly at a couple of the schools that have had a high potential for EL needs, but also for those schools that might have one or two students who have, if you think about the last links test, have a higher achievement level, but still need some additional supports that our classroom teachers can't necessarily provide. So this is a process we're still in going through. But again, staff at middle and middle and elementary identified this as a need. The Early Literacy Academy expansion, Mr. Mancusi is considering adding another teacher and support staff to increase student participation in that program. And then finally, there is a resounding request across all levels for intervention support. This includes both interventionists, people who are actually working with the students, as well as SRBI coordinators. And I put in parentheses there a couple of the ideas that are being explored is either release time during the day and or extending the year for some of these SRBI coordinators so that they can begin their work earlier in this, before teachers and students return, so that the table is essentially set for that return, and groups are formed, needs are identified, the data's ready, and we can begin right at the beginning of the school year with providing those interventions. When the teachers begin, when the coordinator begins with everybody else, there's a lag time in getting those interventions up to speed. So we do have staff in the district, as the board knows, some folks, teachers on 10.5 months schedules and things like that. And so that's one of the ideas that's being presented at this point for this as well. But again, I want to be really clear that there's need both for the intervention support as well as the coordination of that support at the levels.
Mrs. Maxicannelli?
So two quick things. Regarding the EL staff, is that looking simply at adding more feet on the ground, or is it also looking at the model? Because obviously, I lost track if it was about 4 years ago where we'd been looking at changing our model of how we served our EL students, and that just ended up not, coming to fruition. But so is this just bodies, or is it also looking at the model?
Should be, at that point, we were looking at a newcomer academy, essentially. But the model, that's one end of the spectrum, in a sense, for a model. The other could be the way we group students, not only for support services, but also when we group them in the classrooms to better support push-in support. So there's a few different ways, and we should always be looking at a model that reduces the number of variables in a student's life to make their learning as and the communication among teachers as simple as possible.
Okay, and then, but as we get ready to talk about the Early Literacy Academy, I assume that, I'm not assuming, I am hoping that there'll be some data in terms of the effectiveness of the program that you'll be able to speak to.
We have planned, I thought it was on this slide, it might be on another slide. We have planned that Mr. Mancusi is going to speak to the Early Literacy Academy, its current work, at one of our January meetings.
Mr. Peterson?
I might just add to that. I know this was a topic of potential cost avoidance long-term, that might help our presentation if, to whatever degree that can be quantified.
You getting all this? Okay.
I have a question. For the Early Literacy Academy, do you foresee it staying at one location, or? That was a yes from Mr. Mancusi. Moving on.
Okay. Anything else, Mr. Mancusi? Okay. The second goal is what we call the SEL goal. And so let's break that down a little bit by need. So the first item here is this, I mentioned already, the social work community outreach position. A couple of the schools have identified a need to engage in better outreach with their parent community. Some of this is driven by English language skills among parents and students. So to some degree, this is around that specific issue of when we think about communication. But it's broader than just that. It's also helping parents understand how they can best support their students. And by that, I don't mean just reading with kids at night. It's the ability to help essentially navigate a school system, right? To know kind of what the information is out there, how to access that information that some parents might need, that goes beyond what our schools already do a very good job at in holding information sessions in the evenings and parent conferences and all that. That some of our families, in order to best access the school system and to level the playing field as much as possible, do require more information. So one of the things we're looking at is, and this is where I again took the liberty of taking a couple of different ideas and combining them, is thinking about this as across schools. So rather than having each school have somebody who does this, and the concern being there that you might have one family who's got 2 or 3 contacts in a school system, that there'd be people assigned across levels that would work with specific families. So they'd be able to build relationships with families and and better support those families. So this is just something that we are, again, in the process of considering. But we recognize that this was a need, again, prior to the pandemic, but it's a need that we suspect has only grown under the pandemic. The second area here is SEL professional learning and support materials. Mr. Mancusi is going to be, the board has requested that we do a review of our program, and that'll be coming forward to you in January of 2022. So we anticipate that there'll be some expenses around this. We also anticipate that some of the materials that we currently have may need to be redistributed. So we don't, this is not, I don't suspect that this is going to be on the scale of a math curriculum adoption in terms of materials, but we may see some gaps along the way that need to be filled. And we want to also, to that point of what that presentation, or excuse me, that review is doing, is building a pre-K-12 alignment of materials and expectations. So we expect that we have to put some money aside for something along that. Again, the implementation of the middle school block. We do believe, and this is one of the concerns that became more apparent under the pandemic, that the current, and this was a belief we had when we initially proposed the middle school schedule a few years ago, that the rush of the middle school schedule stood as a barrier to develop student-teacher relationships. So what we're hoping, and one of the expectations we have, that with a slightly longer block, teachers will be able to better connect with students, and students better able to connect with not only teachers but with each other. And I have one more slide on that. This, actually, if there's any questions on this slide before I go to the next.
Mr. Peterson?
Just a quick comment. I'm actually really interested in the community outreach position. I've thought a lot. We absolutely have gaps across our student population, and we think about what we can do in the schools, what levers we can pull in the schools, and it seems like what you're doing here is widening the scope a little bit, and I appreciate this. I just want to say I appreciate the focus of this in trying to address things that are outside our walls.
Mrs. Gerber?
Yeah, just regarding the block schedule. I know that at least with the high school, when they changed over, there was considerable professional development tied to that. So, and I believe that the middle school block isn't going to be as long as the high school block, but still obviously will be a change. So with that in mind, just, do you know, it seemed to me, and this was just anecdotally, but it seemed to me as if there was a tremendous amount of professional development with the high school staff leading up into the implementation of the high school block change. Do you foresee something along the same lines? And if so, in terms of cost and time, how will that play into the budget?
And again, depending on the timing of the implementation of the actual schedule, our expectation would be that this spring, we would begin that professional development. Actually, I should say in the winter, we would begin that professional development. And we would do a lot of it in-house on existing Tuesdays, early release days, things like that. We would also include in that, as the high school did, a couple of those practice days where students went through the schedule, teachers went through the schedule, they then debriefed, reviewed the feedback they got on that day, and then made some changes as a result of that. So we would do that as well as part of the professional implementation plan.
Okay, so that will all be taking place in this current year?
That would be our hope, yes.
So the professional development time and budget that we have allotted for this year will be able to cover that?
Yes.
And then do we foresee additional professional development once the schedule is actually in? Like, so will that be built into next year's budget, I guess, is the question. So this will be an ongoing thing, I would imagine.
Yes, and I appreciate that, because I think the thing that school systems can fall down on, right, is you met the deadline, you got it in, and now you walk away because everything's going to be good. And we have to have a continuing commitment, not only in the professional development, the instructional planning for that, but what has to happen now when we think about assessment practices, the way you organize groups. There's all kinds of other pieces to that will need further refinement in the years to come. The way we structure the team meetings at the middle school, the crew meetings at the high school, at the middle school, that's also an opportunity to build that into their part of the day where they do meet. So when they're thinking about an instructional practice and they're reviewing student work, they now can also include with that how they've structured groups, how they're using their instructional time. Those are all pieces that can also play into that. So it's just a continual process of improvement.
And then just one more thing. So knowing that we will also on December 14th be getting the math curriculum presentation, which includes middle school, and assuming that there would be some professional development tied into that, I mean, is there any concern that this is going to really burden the middle school staff with these two significant types of professional development, and just how will that, be handled moving forward, just in terms of, I mean, I would just hate to have something lost, along the way. Like, I'm sure the intent is to focus on both aspects, but is that realistic and something, or would it perhaps become overwhelming for staff?
No, budgeting money, but we don't focus as much on the budget of time and the professional development time we have. I think that there's opportunity when we talk about the new math curriculum of instructional time. I think that those two things can be done together. But they also time. I don't want to give away presentation, but the math curriculum was the first one changed as a result of the Common Core standards, right? It's the first one that now is the second revision tied to the Common Core standards. A lot of the work around the content standards is in place. We always have work to do to refine that. It's really now about moving toward practice, the instructional practice around those standards, and connecting that back to the instructional time. I think will help support those changes we want to see in math instruction. So again, short answer, I apologize. There's a way to implement these together, but I think we will have to be mindful in budget time to make sure they're each getting their due, particularly with that group of teachers.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this goal? Okay, seeing none, you can move on.
Again, some reiteration of things we already talked about, and I don't want to, the board to feel like we're just using up your time and adding slides when we don't need to. But it's really critical as we looked at this and in our conversations and I've talked about this when we were talking about the 4 draft goals with the board. They each exist in a sense on their linear path. And each, as we build off the district improvement plan, will have a linear path of expansion forward. But one of the things that's been very clear to the steering committee as we worked, and was clear to the DLT as they did this work, is there is this inherent overlap among these ideas. And we wanted to make sure that we captured that not only for ourselves, but for the board going forward, that when we're talking about an early literacy academy expansion, we're talking about addressing student learning needs, but we're also talking about supporting the social and emotional learning needs of those students, giving them the direct instruction, the smaller classroom space that they need. So there's integration of these, there's deliberate integration, and it serves as a reminder to us that when we develop the program, we need to be mindful of accomplishing all of these goals. Now, I don't know if there's any further questions on these that you'd like me to answer.
Any questions? Nope.
This is the third goal. This is what in the committee has been referred to as the DEI goal, as a shorthand. And again, when you look at the specific ideas that came forward under this, you see that reiteration of some of the things that all the things we've already talked about. being more mindful of, and I don't want to separate out the D, the E, and the I, but really thinking about the diverse learning needs of our students, providing an equitable foundation for students, and then really being inclusive in our practices as we go forward to think about how we're going to be mindful of the students in front of us and be supportive of their needs. I would say to you, while I'm not ranking these four by any means, to my mind, in addition to the early literacy work that's critical to the going forward of our district, the intervention support staff, the idea of providing a strong integrated pre-K-12 intervention program, SRBI program, is mindful of the needs of students at each of those different levels, and making some hard decisions about how we're going to support kids through those needs is really the top priorities of the district. Any questions on this?
Questions?
Not sure really how to frame this, but since this is around the DEI, this page, in terms of what you're speaking to in, you know, the scope and diversity of learner needs, this slide seems particularly focused on supports in terms of interventions. I'm wondering if there's a broader spectrum that you're looking at in terms of diverse learner needs. And I'm just thinking off the top of the head, I know we might circle back to Math Academy, or we're also going to be looking at gifted practices and things like that. So I'm wondering if this slide encompasses not only those who need supports to boost up, but also the full range of our diverse learners.
It does, Ms. Jacobson, and I failed to do it here, but when I think in the past I've always tried to talk about, when we talk about interventions, the connotation with that word, unfortunately, is that the students who need bolstering to catch them up, and we have to be thinking about it for the students who are already there. And yes, and intervention should really have a very broad definition. We don't have a slide. Interestingly, we didn't align any of the level request budget ideas to Goal 4. I think to some degree we look at Goal 4 as an overarching goal that supports the other goals, and more perhaps in the sense of process goal. But I didn't want to also leave it off and make it happen to Goal 4, so we gave it a slide. And so I don't know if there's any further questions. I appreciate the administrators who are with us tonight, and if there's any questions that you feel that they can be of some support in answering. Again, my only cautions are at this point, because we're still in the developmental stage of this large budget, we're not yet able to get into a level of detail that I'm sure some people might like to get into, but I think that would be premature given some of the we don't know yet, let me put it this way, we don't know yet what the full puzzle looks like, so it's difficult at this point to define the necessary pieces, if that makes sense. Even the pieces that will be included in the final puzzle.
Does anybody have any additional thoughts or questions? Mr. Peterson.
More thought than a question. You mentioned this in your introduction to what we're doing here tonight, but I really do want to give Mr. Cummings credit for his thoughts about extending backward the budget plan. This is something he brought to our Finance Committee right after our last budget cycle, and we, I think, welcomed it very, very warmly, thinking that the amount of time that we spent on in the previous budget, talking about things like social workers and early literacy academy. The more time that we have to process that, the more time the community has to process that, the more time that we have to talk about, well, what are the offsets and what are the costs and benefits. I think it's going to, I hope it's going to redound to the benefit of the budget cycle in general. So I did want to say thank you. Thank you for that. I really appreciate we're overhauling it in this kind of more detailed direction.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson, and I very much appreciate that, but I also, because we accelerated the timeline with additional work for all of our administrators and teachers, so I want to thank them as well for their work to respond to this. And I do want to point out that, we included in tonight's presentation, and you'll see it in future agendas, there'll be further detail in upcoming meetings to kind of get the Literacy Academy, the math textbooks, to further set the stage and give the board opportunity to provide more input on ultimately what would be wrapped into the final budget presentation.
Yes, and from the board's perspective, I thank the staff as well. I think there's going to really be a benefit for us going forward.
Any other questions? How do you want to handle questions moving forward? Being that this is part of the budget process, do you want to keep a master document, something that we could potentially post on the budget page just so the community can follow along in terms of getting more information about these initiatives? And you don't have to answer that right now, but I think that we're just putting it out there in terms of being that we're starting, this is new, and starting the process, and I think the board members, I suspect, are going to think about this, and new questions are probably going to arise over the next few weeks. Want to just bring the public along, even though it may not necessarily be in a public meeting, but just having a place for next steps to be archived.
Thank you. I think we can certainly look at that. I talk about it with the directors tomorrow. I think that, again, one of the prime purposes of doing this evening was to get your questions and to solicit any feedback. But we know we're not done. So I think if we, perhaps if this point we put together essentially kind of what we've done in the past, although we've started before in the past in January, putting together a spreadsheet around specific issues that might come up. And I would ask that if we do it that way, we just do it around perhaps the goal area right now might be the easiest way to simplify it.
Okay. From the mathematics textbook purchases, have you started identifying texts?
Dr. Rasmussen and his staff are in the process of doing that, yes.
And Mrs. Gerber?
Just to follow up on that, so will the textbook be part of the curriculum presentation? Do you anticipate that they would have something by then, or is that going to be something that will take place later?
I think that will be possible if they stay on their current pace.
Okay. And I guess just knowing how much we hear discussions about supply issues, do we foresee that whatever textbooks are selected would be able to be ordered and be available in time?
I haven't heard that being an issue. I spent a little time with the team working. Actually, I'm being overly generous to myself. I spent about 15 minutes with them yesterday at Roger Lolo, and they were eating lunch. But that wasn't that was an accident. But I will tell you that it was the most animated, in a positive way, I've ever seen a group of teachers around a particular textbook idea. So my expectation would be that the things that they select will be deliverable.
And just based on past curriculum presentations or textbook presentations, will there be an opportunity for parents to review the textbooks?
Oh, absolutely. What we've started doing a couple years ago, right, putting them essentially online, allowing people to access them online and provide feedback online so that it's just not limited to the physical. We'll be engaged in all of that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Ms. Jacobson?
Just through you, I'm wondering, to piggyback on your previous comment, how you want us to relay. I know this is also to ask questions ahead of time, give some insight into what we may be thinking in terms of priority areas or where we want to look at things. So would we go through, send that to Mr. Cummings, or would we go through possibly the Finance Committee at this point? Or, so if we know we're looking for something, where do you want that to go right now?
I think that it should probably go to Mr. Cummings at this point.
Sure.
Well, just because the Finance Committee is not meeting until the first week in December. So I think that if you have questions sooner rather than later.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Peterson, I don't want to speak for the Finance Committee, but
No, I think that's fine. I think the Finance Committee can stand ready to work with whatever process Mr. Cummings comes up with. We're certainly well in advance for our December meeting. If it's useful to use us for that, that's fine. If not,
I'm
it's
happy
fine.
we can CC.
yeah, I posed this question. I probably should have just waited. We could have addressed that offline. But I do appreciate the board's probably going to have questions.
It's helpful if we can head things off ahead of time before January, then that will be great.
Well, even, some of these, I think, being that we're going to be getting presentations in December on some of these issues, I think questions specific about the December 14th presentations should go directly to Mr. Cummings, because it might help inform those presentations. I have a question about the math textbooks. Are they going to be available online? Like, is there an online version of it? Stuff like that might just be helpful to staff sooner rather than later. If there's other bigger pictures about some of these initiatives that you think on a board level you want to share, you can send them to Mr. Peterson. Mrs. Maxcanelli.
Just a couple of questions. Through the chair to Mrs. Jacobson, were you talking only about questions, or were there things you were looking for that you didn't see? Because then I would have thought this would be the place for that.
Well, no, not on this presentation tonight, because I feel like this is more about new initiatives tied to goals and not maybe existing items in getting into that whole thing right now, that this was more an opportunity for new initiatives. So mine were maybe more on existing or something that may not be in here, so.
Okay.
But I think that might be good feedback also just from the board right now in terms of we still have, almost 2 months, before the budget is presented to us. If there's other questions, budget related, to share them right now with the superintendent, not this very moment, but in the upcoming weeks via email with Mr. Cummings. I think that it would be helpful, just social workers, myself, just a little bit of feedback on how that's going with the social workers that we funded in this last budget are working on. Is there any overlap with this new position that's being suggested? Could any of that work be done by the social workers that have been hired for this year? Again, not asking for an answer right now, but just along those lines of thinking, we just ask board members to share that ahead of time with Superintendent. Mrs. Maxcanelli.
Yeah, and through the chair to Mr. Peterson, is that I know something we've talked about a few budget years in a row, and I thought we really made a point of it this last January, of really wanting to have a historical look at some of the initiatives of the past 5-6 years even, that we get the explanation of, we ultimately have passed most of them, and now where are they? What have they added to Fairfield Public Schools? Where have they fallen short? What should be let go? And maybe some of that's naturally been happening, but we haven't heard about it. And that reflection was something that I thought we'd asked Finance Committee to take a look at. But I know I said it, but I also know I didn't follow up on it. So to add that to the conversation, I would be interested in that as an examination. And obviously, if it were to have any impact on this year, it would.
We did discuss it in Finance Committee, and I think that some of that happens organically in the work that we do. If there's something specific that you have in mind, I would ask to share that.
I'll look. And then my second question was regarding, 2 questions regarding math. First of all, with your reference to that the textbooks that they're looking at seem to be primarily or exclusively 6 through 12, then that would indicate to me that I think it was called Bridges, that was the K through 5 text, that is meeting what the curriculum, what we're looking to continue with in the elementary school. So not that I expect you to speak to that tonight, but I would want to hear more about that, because that was once we finally passed a math textbook in elementary school, that was a very big deal. And I know that came with some, added time that was needed for, I'm making this up, math corners, and just, so I would hope that that would be part of what we hear more about, because obviously the fact that we're sticking with it, I would hope that that's had some, borne some fruit. And then also, I think it was Mrs. Jacobson who did mention the Math Academy, and that assuming that we are in fact moving away from that, we advocated last January to add that back in for one more year as a bridge, but I don't know if it's a natural part of the math curriculum presentation, but what exactly is being done for that, and if any additional money is needed to be allocated to the success of whatever the new, model is, I would want to hear more about that at some point, and that might be something we could hear before January.
That's a plan for a November 30th agenda.
Any other thoughts, questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you, Mr. Cummings, for the presentation. Thank you to staff that joined us tonight, and to the administrators and teachers and everybody who put so much work in to getting this before us prior to January. We hope that our feedback will and help you as you move forward over the next coming weeks in finalizing the budget and developing these programs.
Thank you.
Mrs. Gerber?
This isn't on the agenda, but right before our meeting began, I got word that the number 12 seeded Ludlow girls volleyball team beat the undefeated Cheshire volleyball team and are going to the state finals on Saturday.
Woo-hoo-hoo! All right. With that, motion to adjourn. Ms. Jacobson, second by Mr. Rotelli. All in favor? Motion carries. We are adjourned. Ms. Kelly, hey,